Hi, everyone. I think we're going to get started again. I know it's a brief break, but I'm Nora from the UT Energy Institute. It's great to see everyone here, and I'm really pleased to introduce Andy Euler. He's he's our own UT Energy Institute Journalism Fellow. And if his name sounds familiar, it's because you've probably heard him on NPR, on Marketplace. And he's going to do a great job with our panel on the future of clean hydrogen in Texas. So let's give him a round.
Thanks, Nora. For all those who celebrate, happy Major League Baseball opening day. That's why so many people, yeah, exactly. So the way this is, thank you guys so much. It's not funny, I was in Houston a couple of weeks ago. Dave and I met and talked about hydrogen actually, and I think 32 panels at CERAWeek this year were just about hydrogen. It was crazy. It was what everybody was talking about. So I'm super excited to have these really, really smart people up here talking about sort of the future of it, where we're going to go, how it's going to affect local communities. The way this is going to work, we're going to have sort of every panelist come up here individually and talk for a few minutes about sort of their involvement in the space. And then we're going to sit down and we're going to have some questions, and then we're going to open it up to audience questions as well. So first, I would love to hear, Dave Dankworth is Hydrogen Portfolio Manager at ExxonMobil, and he's going to tell you what that big company is up to in hydrogen.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. It's really good to be here. This is my first time to speak at an Energy Week, even though ExxonMobil and UT have been working together for many years. And I've been to some meetings here, but I haven't had a chance to actually get up here and do this. So I'm happy to do it today. What I really want to tell you today is hydrogen is a viable way to decarbonize hard to electrify industries and sectors. And ExxonMobil is working really hard to try to make that, thank you, to make that a reality. And in other words, deliver low carbon intensity hydrogen that can be used for that decarbonization at large scale. And I'll say a little bit more about that. I've been working for about 30 years in the kind of energy technology field, all of it with ExxonMobil, but mostly on delivering clean fuels for transportation, where things like sulfur and other toxic pollutants were the problem years ago. My current role is focused on hydrogen technologies. It's really about enabling that hydrogen value chain across all the sectors where it could be useful and across all the geographies where you might want to use it. And that means you need a robust technology set in order to think about that worldwide at large scale. So my team is growing. It's growing every week, every month as we build the business. It works really closely with our low carbon solutions business to look at how do we enable these large projects that we're attempting at each part of the value chain. So you can think about generating hydrogen is one part of the puzzle. You also have to think about the transportation, and is it going to be hydrogen or ammonia or something like that that actually gets transported? And then you have to think about also the end use. It's not a given that people will be able to buy hydrogen and use it 100%. You need that technology to do that. So me and my team are working on delivering those technologies into the ExxonMobil business. And I want to say a little bit about that business. Did I go the wrong way? It's just, that's okay. Here, gotcha. Let's say a little bit about that business. ExxonMobil Low Carbon Solutions was launched about 2 years ago as the third leg of the ExxonMobil Corporation. So there's now a downstream business, an upstream business, and a low carbon solutions business. The goal of low carbon solutions is to hit the businesses in that blue circle, where we think ExxonMobil has particular skills and capabilities. We're really good at dealing with molecules and delivering energy via molecules. And we're focusing on things like carbon capture and storage, hydrogen, and low emissions fuels such as biofuels. So hydrogen is really interesting. And of course, I'm a fan because I'm working on it, but it's interesting because it is an energy source that can give you zero emissions at point of use. And furthermore, it also makes it easy for the user because you can make hydrogen centrally in a way, let's say if you make it from natural gas or some carbon containing material, you can make it centrally. You can take the carbon out of there and deal with large quantities of carbon dioxide at the central point. The user doesn't have to worry about dealing with each point source that they have. So in this way, hydrogen kind of fills that nice spot where if you want to just deliver energy, or you want to buy energy, and you don't want to worry about how you clean it up, then hydrogen is a good fuel for you. Same thing for transportation. Put hydrogen in a long distance truck. You don't have the emissions of the tailpipe, but you can go a lot further than you can on batteries. So we see hydrogen as a real opportunity, along with these other options like just regular carbon capture and storage from a large source, or the low emissions fuels. So a good example of what I just said is the large hydrogen, blue hydrogen project that ExxonMobil is proposing in Baytown, Texas. Thank you. Okay. The large project we're proposing in Baytown, Texas. This project will produce 1 million tons a year of very low carbon intensity hydrogen. That's about 1 billion cubic feet per day. It's enough to take out 30% of the emissions of our own petrochemical plant next door, with enough left over to send some ammonia further distances and decarbonize other customers in the area. We believe it's a good start. It also allows us to build the infrastructure to put 10 million tons per year of CO2 into sequestration. That's a scale that's big enough to make it affordable. That's the other point here. By doing these large scale things, you get to an affordable solution that fits within the subsidies and incentives that are available to us today on the IRA. So that's what I wanted to say. I will look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
And we'll get into it. It's wonderful, and sort of the way that we designed this panel too. We have folks from Baytown here to sort of talk about local effects and things like that. So Dave, thank you for that. And we can talk about economic incentives and things like that happening in the community with Victor later. Shindal Periasamy is VP of Energy Transition at Air Liquide. He's going to tell us sort of his version of what's happening in the hydrogen space, but also talk about decarbonization more generally. Yeah.
Morning, everyone. Thank you, Andy. You talked about number of panels that's been organized very recently on hydrogen. Okay, it's just mine and Dave's second panel tour just in the month of March. Okay, so that you can see the importance of hydrogen that the whole world is talking about right now. Good morning. My name is Shindal Periasamy. I'm the Vice President for Energy Transition for Air Liquide in the Americas. My specific responsibilities include developing and implementing decarbonization strategies, energy transition strategies for our own customers' operations, as well as help support our own industrial assets. Okay. So today I'm happy to be part of the future of the hydrogen panel. And before I begin, I just want to talk about, if you're not familiar with the Air Liquide, I just want to give a quick overview. Air Liquide has been around for more than over 120 years. So we are world leader in industrial gases, technologies and services. It's for industry as well as for the health. So our gases are essential molecules or feedstocks for a number of industrial processes. So anywhere from the mobile phones you carry, the aircrafts you take, the beverages, or even the beverage containers. So you will find our industrial gases there, hydrogen included. Okay? So because it touches a number of industry processes and people's lives, so we have a responsibility to do our part in the energy transition, in the fight to climate change. Okay? So last year, we have announced our strategic plan called Advance. So it's Air Liquide has always been working to combine the growth of our business with the concerns for the environment and society. Okay? So along those lines, our new strategic plan, Advance, focuses on delivering comprehensive performance around 4 strategic pillars. So of the 4 strategic pillars, so one of them is decarbonizing the planet. So yes, the way that we boldly call it, decarbonizing the planet. So decarbonizing the planet means decarbonizing our own operations, help support decarbonize our customers' operations, and also capture the opportunities coming out of this new energy transition market. So we set our climate objectives. So we would like to reach 1/3 carbon reduction by 2035 compared to our 2025 numbers. Then by 2025, we would like to start decreasing our absolute carbon emissions. And then like many companies, we have the carbon neutrality goals. We want to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. And then in terms of hydrogen, our goal is to triple the revenue of hydrogen. And then in terms of the investment, as a company globally, we are committed to 8 billion euro investment through 2035. Okay? So that's our plan. Then coming to hydrogen, so hydrogen is versatile, as our previous speaker said, as also the keynote speaker said. Hydrogen is versatile. It has got a place in a number of applications, be it industry, transportation, power generation. It's got a place in every part of the solution. It has a huge potential to become about 20% of the energy demand by 2050. So looking forward to talking to other panelists and your questions. Thank you for the opportunity.
Next, we have Pedro Santos. He's the executive chairman, CTO, and founder of Andalusian Energy and CNG Motive. He's going to blaze through these slides.
Thanks, Andy, and it's a pleasure to speak to all of you today. I guess I have a slightly smaller company than the 2 preceding companies here on the panel, but I'll offer some perspectives from my technology entrepreneur background. What my companies do is that we focus on technology to transport and utilize natural gas and hydrogen, mostly in compressed or gaseous form. But we have the first vehicle that is compliant with the latest safety regulations of the FRA. That's the rail vehicle you see on the top right. And we also have a version for hydrogen that is going to be actively regularly carrying cargo back and forth in Canada later this year. So we're pretty excited about that. And then Andalusian is on the export side, containerized export and transportation of gases. So one of the things that we talked about is that that's a very important part of the supply chain. And when you see the economics of hydrogen to a good extent, except for those that are connected to a pipeline, are going to have to undergo a multiple of cost. After you make cheap hydrogen somewhere in the Midwest or in West Texas, then you still have to get it to market. And those are some of the difficult questions. So one of the speakers spoke about the versatility of hydrogen. Thank you. And hydrogen is referred to as the Swiss Army knife. So effectively, hydrogen is a building block for so many different things and so many applications and has so much potential. And we sometimes get lost into, oh, everything could work with hydrogen. And then we start looking into, well, what kinds of hydrogen? And then we get into the Skittles. And it's really, really hard to keep track about what's the better hydrogen, the worse hydrogen. But if the ultimate objective is decarbonization, then what we really care about is what is the carbon intensity and what are the grams per kilowatt hour? I mean, that's something that can be defined. It is measurable, although indirect in most cases. And it gives us an opportunity to then have a facts-based conversation and compare alternatives. And there's no one solution that works for everything. I mean, if you have a particular location that is convenient for sequestration, then certainly blue hydrogen or hydrogen coming from natural gas and carbon sequestration is going to be very low carbon or much lower carbon than what is the projected grid. But generally, what everybody's looking for is or thinks about hydrogen, mostly indirectly, about renewable energy being the source of that hydrogen. Extremely low carbon, not zero, because you still need to manufacture a lot of the equipment and do a lot of work in order to get that hydrogen to market. But it is a good possibility. And then it takes a certain amount of energy, and I hope we get into some of that debate later. But when you think about the supply chain, when you think about hydrogen, it really pulls a lot of different parts of the industry. Some of them are going to be existing either because of skill sets, some small percentage of the infrastructure is compatible, but the raw magnitude of what needs to happen for a complete conversion and a complete decarbonization, the way that the goals for 2050 are for most companies, it's a staggering effort. And my focus here is on the conversion, transport, and to some extent enabling the use. But there are companies that are focused in different parts of the space and working actively on technology to make it better. In some cases, the applications are conditioned by physics. So it's pretty inconvenient, but one of the things, I live in Silicon Valley, and sometimes there's no boundaries to what you consider that technology can do. In the energy world, we're bound by physics, which gives us some boundaries that are difficult to avoid. So when you think about a locomotive, for the last almost 100 years, locomotives have been running on diesel. And diesel is a phenomenal fuel because you can store a lot of it. So under the locomotive, you can store 5,000 plus gallons of diesel. To do the same thing with hydrogen or any of its derivatives, you're talking about another locomotive that you have to carry around just to carry the fuel. And that basically means that that application is challenged. You have similar cases with airplanes that the weight of the fuel matters in a great amount. And it's not just the fuel, it's also the container that's carrying it. But the other piece, aside from the boundaries of what your application requires, is the cost. And sometimes we ignore, we say, well, we're going to go hydrogen. Yes, but at what cost? And once you combine both cases and what is inevitable, what isn't, and I'm borrowing from a great slide that I saw about what are the applications. The applications that by default have to use hydrogen. If you're going to make ammonia, that's 3 out of the 4 atoms that you need for an ammonia molecule. So, and nitrogen is easily obtained because we're surrounded by it. So that's going to be an unavoidable case. And it's the one of the biggest consumers of hydrogen right now. Same thing when you're doing hydrocracking or you're doing petrochemicals. Those are going to be natural fits with generating hydrogen. And the lower carbon, of course, can be utilized there. Some other applications that are proposed for hydrogen are no longer going to be hydrogen. Light duty vehicles for the longest amount of time were capturing the imagination of the automakers, but those are all going to be electric. So the reality is that hydrogen is going to take a long time. It's going to take a lot of cost, and we may as well direct it in the areas that can best make use of it effectively. I think we're going to talk a little bit about Texas and the Gulf, and it's the perfect place to start with hydrogen in the US. I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Next up, we have Victor Brownlees. He is the City of Baytown's Chief Growth Officer. And Pedro, you teed it up perfectly. We're super interested in sort of understanding how hydrogen fits into the Gulf Coast, into Southeast Texas, and Victor's going to tell us all that.
Thanks very much, Andy. So I'm from Baytown. Who's consciously been to Baytown? Excellent. Okay, many of you may have unconsciously been there because we are the eastern bookend of the Houston metro area. So if you drive along I-10 going towards Louisiana, you will visit Baytown. We're a city of about 85,000 people within the city limits. We serve a population overall of about 150,000 or so. So why does it matter to us? ExxonMobil has been in Baytown for longer than the city government has been in operation. It's been there since 1919. The city is only 75 years old this year. 20%, 1/5 of the workforce in Baytown is employed by ExxonMobil. And it has other competitors within our city. Over half of our workforce is involved in the energy sector. And when you consider the spillover in the remainder of the economy, we are hugely joined at the hip with the energy sector in Baytown. So it matters to us going forward that companies like ExxonMobil remain relevant and invest in new technology and continue to employ those numbers and continue to make the contribution that they have made to the economy. And to that end, last year, and one of the reasons my own role within the city morphed from Director of Finance into Chief Growth Officer is because I began a conversation with them. So what's next for you? We have a relationship with you. They pay us the equivalent of the cost of running the city's fire department every year. A huge amount of money. And I said to them, so what's next? How do we secure that? How do we know you're going to continue paying for it? How do we know that you're going to continue being relevant in today's global economy? How can we help you do more and invest here and not somewhere else? And to that end, we concluded a 35-year economic development agreement last December. And the primary purpose of that is to incentivize the investment in the Baytown plant in blue hydrogen. That's why it matters to the people of Baytown. Happy to talk further about our experiences and what's next for us and for ExxonMobil. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. I'm gonna have a seat. Things are gonna get real. I'll ask a few questions and then we'll open it up to the audience for questions too. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, perfect. So I'll sort of, hydrogen's viability right now. Peter, you were talking about it's going to take a minute. Dave, what do you think? Are we, the investment in Baytown, that came before, certainly before the IRA. I imagine y'all were planning some sort of hydrogen projects even before the infrastructure bill. I'm curious about ExxonMobil and Air Liquide, and also for you, Pedro, as well, sort of this idea of now is the time to get in hydrogen.
Well, I think certainly, now is the time to think about industrial decarbonization. It's going to take a long time to do it. It's about 30% of the emissions in the world, right? This conversion over of technology is not easy. Typically takes 20 years to get a new technology from incubation to full-scale deployment in our industry. We're trying to speed that up. But if you want net zero by 2050, you have to start now. And where you can find places where it's viable, where it works. And before the IRA, we had 45Q by itself, and we had other things that were coming along.
Yep.
So I guess my role is more on the technology side of it, but I will say policy is very, very important. Like the previous keynote speaker said, the way the policy is structured and the fact that it's there, it has a lot to do with the viability of what wins, what doesn't win, what works, what doesn't work.
Well, and the ability of your team to get bigger, I imagine, helps when subsidies and policy sort of align with that, yeah?
Yeah, where we see a good alignment, we can go faster, right? And we can go bigger. That's right.
Kendall, what do you think?
From my point of view, absolutely yes, hydrogen is viable today. Okay? And hydrogen is not new. Hydrogen has been around for many, many decades. Yeah, Liquid particularly, we've been in hydrogen activities for more than 60 years. So the question of the challenge is clean hydrogen viable today, right? I think, but again, the good news is the technologies are here. The technologies are here now. What we've done from a Liquid point of view, even before the IRA or the VAL passed. So we are still operating the largest electrolyzer in Canada. That is to demonstrate the power of the low carbon clean hydrogen. Another example is in Nevada, we started the Air Liquide's largest liquid hydrogen production facility last year, so 30 ton per day liquid hydrogen production facilities. So the technologies are there. I think the challenge is to really continue to invest in at-scale production so that in a larger economy, when this scales up, then you have the you have the technology ready, you have the cost to meet the end use demand.
Pedro, you made the distinction. I mean, depending on what kind of hydrogen we're talking about, right? The viability.
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, the vast majority of the hydrogen is either gray, brown, or black, depending on brown and black, depending on the definition for coal gasified hydrogen. So that's most of what you have today, and that's a result of low cost coal and low cost natural gas. But when you think about green hydrogen, it's still such a small amount, and we don't talk about the challenges. You know, if you have, in order to make low cost green hydrogen, you basically need electricity in the order of 1, 2, maybe 3 cents a kilowatt hour. And that's out of reach for most places that consume electricity, because if you had electricity that cheap, there would be other better uses than sending it into hydrogen. So when you think about the hydrogen side, one of the bets that my company has made is on the railroad side, because railroads cross a lot of the country where the renewables are very cheap and you can't get them out. So if you think about West Texas, a lot of the Midwest, in Canada, you have a lot of trapped hydro. So you are going to get those kind of electricity prices that are never going to connect into the electrical grid. But then the challenge usually is transportation. And that's where there's a little bit more technology that needs to be developed. So if you think about it from a career perspective, now is a fantastic time because it takes 20 years. So if you think of yourself as about to graduate from your degree in university, this industry will be at its peak when you're at the peak of your career. So it is a fantastic time to get involved in it. There are a lot of risks because there's a lot of policy misalignment. There's a lot of exploration and discovery that's missing in the sector.
And Victor, when you're coming to city meetings, when you're coming to talk to the city council, talk to the mayor about these things, and you say hydrogen, do they look at you sideways? Do they say, oh, you know what? We understand oil and gas. They've been here forever. What is this new technology? Why do we trust that it's actually going to sort of make sense here in Baytown?
Okay, and as I made it clear, we are an energy town. Mostly we get it. Our mayor actually works for Air Liquide, as an example.
There you go.
So there is a level of understanding, I think, because of that. But one of the particular issues that confronted us was the long-term needs for investment. This is over a very, very long period of time. And historically, the city was making decisions, a year at a time, a few years at a time. Even the relationship we had with ExxonMobil was only ever a 7-year time horizon. We realized that doesn't work anymore when we're talking about this level of investment. Hence why we renegotiated last year and why our agreement now is 35 years. And that's the maximum allowed by the local government code. If it could be longer, it would be.
Pedro, you were talking about the rainbow, the hydrogen rainbow, and apparently the EPA is even sort of relaxing what they're talking about in terms, and instead using carbon intensity. First, I'd love your take on sort of the nomenclature and how important those sorts of things are, especially when we're trying to educate people about the energy industry, about hydrogen. Sort of the way that we talk about it matters, right?
If we only had a few colors, that would be ideal. Because actually to communicate, hey, this is green hydrogen, I think everybody can relate to, oh, it's clean, green, et cetera. It's great. But once you start adding 8, 10 plus colors, then you don't really understand the difference between one and the other. And as an engineer, so as a marketer, I love the colors.
Sure.
As an engineer, I'm 100% focused on the grams per kilowatt hour, because that's really what matters and how you can organize. It's around that figure. So when you think about the differences between one technology, one application or the other, then that allows you to compare them on a quantitative basis rather than go by feelings or what you like or your favorite color and favorite foods, et cetera. So it is very important to go down the carbon intensity route and then speak about facts and figure out how do we manage, how do we do the accounting better. And a lot of the externalities that were discussed by the speaker it's easier to shine a light on them if you're talking about a common fact and a common way that you measure them.
Sort of an understood language, right? Yeah. Chandel, have you seen the way that you talk about hydrogen and talk about sort of technology change over the years?
Yeah, I like rainbow. I like all colors. In Early Kid, we believe that all forms of hydrogen have a role to play. And the emphasis should really be focused on what's the outcome of using the low carbon hydrogen. So that's where the emphasis should be, rather than on the production method itself. Okay. Yeah, I mean, yeah, eventually we would like to transition to really low carbon or zero carbon hydrogen, but it could take some time. But in the meantime, absolutely all forms of hydrogen is important. That in a way, it gives an opportunity for the producers to be flexible so that they can produce really the cheapest possible molecule for the end use. So at this point, what we need is to really enable the market. Once the market is there, once the demand is there, then the production will come.
Dave, the $1 million question is the project in Baytown, blue hydrogen. Yeah, is it clean? Is it cleaner? What do you think?
Well, I guess I would agree with what was just said there, that we're agnostic to the color.
Sure.
Right. So, but the important thing is the carbon intensity.
Yeah.
And the IRA has the different levels of carbon intensity, but once you get down below about 1.5 tons of CO2 per ton of hydrogen, you're starting to get pretty clean. Right. Even making solar panels will give you more than that over a 20-year life on an electrolyzer hydrogen. So what we think is important is that it does need to be clean. If we're going to use it for decarbonization, we'd like to see an impact at the end of the day, that the greenhouse gas emissions are being mitigated somehow. Blue can meet that very nicely if you pay attention to all parts of the process.
Gotcha.
Right? You can't have a sloppy, where you're capturing half of it and letting the other half go. You need to capture almost all of the CO2 out of the process. You need to pay attention to the feedstocks, and also pay attention to the efficiency of the end use. And is 100% hydrogen being burned in the furnace at the end point, or 50-50 blend? All those things matter, but we'd like to see it have an impact, and that's kind of where we're targeting our efforts, is to make sure that whatever we do, that's happening.
And in terms of the education of folks in Baytown, the education of folks in the region about not necessarily using green or blue or whatever, the sort of rainbow, but telling them, hey, this is going to be a different for the environment, different for your air quality, different for maybe for your water quality. I imagine those are kind of conversations.
It matters. I mean, and fair play to Dave and his team. They will reduce the overall carbon footprint of the Baytown plant by about 30%. That's equivalent to taking 1.5 million, 1.5 million cars off the road. That matters to the people locally. So credit to you for planning that.
I was going to ask you too, Victor, existing and Dave and Chindel and everybody sort of chime in here too. Existing infrastructure, I imagine, is a draw for cities that understand, first of all, that understand sort of the way that things work, but also a conversion of maybe platforms and things like that. Part of the deal?
It is, yeah. I mean, I mentioned it earlier, the spillover benefits to the remainder of the economy are huge. 20% employed directly in ExxonMobil and many, many more in associated industries, and with plastic recycling also increasing with the work in the Baytown plant. The benefit is huge. So we get the upside in terms of the economic benefit and the upside in terms of the environmental benefit too.
Dave, I mean, I imagine when y'all are pitching projects, if the city understands what's going on or has that existing infrastructure, it's an easier sell, maybe to shareholders, maybe to your bosses. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you have win-win-win, that's always good, right? And that's what you'd like to see. And very often there is this huge community impact. You invest and then you do it in a way that's environmentally sensitive and also gives local community energy and raw materials that you need, that then other industries come up and can take advantage of those. Then a lot of good things happen.
And obviously, we're talking about multinationals. We're talking about ExxonMobil. We're talking about Air Liquide. Chindel, in terms of looking at Southeast Texas as a place where hydrogen makes the most sense, is it permitting? Is it understanding of the technology? Is it that workforce already being there? Maybe all of the above. You tell me.
All the above. Texas leads the world in hydrogen production today. If you look at, there is about 10 million tons a year of hydrogen is being produced in the US. 1/3 is produced right here in Texas, in Gulf Coast area particularly. Okay. So it's got a huge infrastructure. So we talked about the existing infrastructure. There are a lot of assets, production assets, transportation assets, as well as storage assets. Yeah, Liquid, for example, we operate carbon in Houston. So the existing infrastructure is there, the expertise is there, and then you've got all the experiences there. Okay. And then on the west side of the Texas, we have the greatest possibility for renewable electricity. So we can certainly take advantage of the existing infrastructure, converting that to clean. And we've got a huge opportunity for carbon capture, sequestration. Geology is really great. And then we can take advantage of the renewable options available from the western side of the Texas. So together, combining all of that, this is a great place to transition to the clean economy with hydrogen.
And Pedro, you were talking about sort of your specific business in transportation, why Southeast Texas makes sense. You were sort of alluding to talking about Texas and the future of hydrogen there.
Actually, Southeast Texas is perhaps the only part of the US that's not going to need a lot of help with transportation because it already can build pipelines, has a lot of the users connected to major hydrogen pipelines that the refineries have traditionally used to trade a lot of the hydrogen excess and needs that they have. So Southeast Texas is well equipped to absorb as much hydrogen as you can throw at it. So if you can develop it in West Texas, then Southeast Texas is going to do great. And you could build a pipeline from West Texas. But I challenge anybody to think about building a pipeline, a new pipeline across the Rockies through all of the different states and getting to California that has a huge need. Or how many pipelines are going to get built out of the best natural gas resource we have in the world. So you have some significant challenges in transportation, and those are going to have to be solved with technology because you're not going to solve them with pipelines. You're going to have to be extremely creative on how you transport higher density. One of the challenges of hydrogen is that the same pipeline diameter carries less.
Yep.
It's just the same volume of a tank carries 4 to 10 times less than diesel. So it is a huge challenge in how do you spend in transportation. And when you think about the infrastructure, maybe 1% of the eventual infrastructure that's needed exists today. Because you can't think of the existing natural gas pipelines. The pipeline technology you need to transport hydrogen is a pipeline technology that was very popular 60 years ago with the grades and metallurgies that are compatible with hydrogen. That's not what you use for natural gas today. So we have to think about infrastructure and enabling the development of infrastructure if we want to be serious about hydrogen and decarbonization. But allowing a single case where you inconvenience one person in the supply chain, that's enough to stop a multi-billion-dollar project. And that is a problem. And that's a reality we're going to have to accept. Not everybody's going to be happy with the result, but we have to be thinking about how to organize it around the bigger picture.
And I sort of opened up with this, but the idea of hydrogen being so talked about in Houston, I mean, you and I talked about it, just how many panels there were. But even, we were talking about it also in the context of hydrogen projects that had been announced and were already sort of in the works relative to now the Infrastructure Reduction Act, obviously the infrastructure bill as well. I'm curious, there's an interesting line in y'all's press release about, and I love it, about the project in Baytown, because it says, the company says it's going to cost $7 billion, but they're going to tell us in 2024 exactly how much they're going to spend in Baytown. So it's sort of leaving this idea open of, we might in fact be spending a whole lot more in Baytown on this project because maybe the Inflation Reduction Act sort of allows us to do that, or there are more subsidies, or there are more incentives. I'm curious sort of about the potential for the government subsidies and sort of incentivizing even more hydrogen and even more production and even more sort of hubs like that as a result, even before, y'all had this project off the ground.
I guess that's not really my area of expertise on
Okay.
on that size, but what I could say is the amount of hydrogen that we'll get, clean hydrogen that will get made, will depend a lot on what we've heard in the last talk.
Yeah.
Right? What are the incentives for the customers, for the end users to actually pick it up and change what they're doing? And so if the cost of the clean hydrogen can be low enough that the benefits people see in using a clean energy overcome that, then, you know, cost benefit will work and you get the transition, or if policy starts to require. You know, what we see right now is the IRA does provide a substantial benefit or substantial kind of incentive that helps to make that balance better, right? So then the question is how much capacity gets built and how fast over the next, you know, 15, 20 years during the time of this law. And, you know, and there's significant industry still on the Gulf Coast. You know, you need a lot more than 1 million tons. You know, we start with the 3 that's there now and start adding the clean for fuel purposes. You need a lot more. So there's a lot of room to grow and a lot of room for other players to get involved.
Exactly. And I was going to tell Kendall too.
Right.
Yeah. Sort of this idea. I talked to the CEO of BP about exactly that, talking about the IRA and different subsidies making the U.S., but specifically Southeast Texas, the place to invest in things like hydrogen. I imagine that's what you're hearing from your bosses and from folks at Air Liquide.
Yeah, from Air Liquide also, we also announced an intent to collaborate with several players in the region, you know, as part of the hydrogen, including UT Austin here, on potential response to the hydrogen hub proposals. That's part of the bipartisan infrastructure law. Yeah. I think, in my view, so if you look at, say, today, if you talk to maybe an industrial operator or a truck operator, what would make them change to hydrogen is it can provide the molecule at a cost parity, right? Clean molecule at a cost parity. So that is what is important. Then how we can achieve that is really through the production at scale. Then at scale, clean hydrogen production is going to be the key. But then for that, although we have the technologies, the deployment of technologies at large scale does require additional investment. Okay. That's where the government policies can help, or government subsidies can help, just exactly like our keynote speaker talked about, the BIL, IRA, funding opportunities, taxes, all of those are going to be essential in really changing what we call the demonstration projects into commercial projects.
Pedro, you were making a little joke about sort of sitting up here with Fortune 50 companies, but I'm curious about sort of access to capital and access to those subsidies for companies like yours relative to the Exxon Mobils of the world. Is it a different game? Is it a different sort of process for y'all to access that IRA money, for y'all to access that infrastructure bill?
Well, as an entrepreneur, I actually don't think about the IRA at all, because when you think about timelines that you have to execute and the possibility or probability, I mean, it's something that you can't bet your company or your technology on. It's great because it does enable some things that would have been even harder. But when I think about going to my board and asking for a $7 billion blue hydrogen, I don't think that they're very amenable to those figures. I think the challenge you have with all these projects is that ultimately companies are organized around economics.
Sure.
And if you have something that is a learning experience, then you're going to see very, very small figures attached to it, or at least anybody willing to take a huge experiment, because that's not how companies are rewarded. So when they organize around costs, I mean, they have to price. If you're doing a blue hydrogen case, then you're going to think about how much do you get paid to sequester the CO2? Is there a benefit? Is somebody paying you extra for the fuel or for the product ultimately? And if there isn't an answer that can be reduced to $1 then it's very, very difficult. And that's part of the challenge, that when we talk about this from a global perspective, you need to be thinking about, are people willing to pay the premium? Because it will cost more. Yeah. People don't want to talk about that. It will cost much more to do all of these decarbonization cases. And that money can't be, I mean, you have to have trillions of dollars. I mean, this is well beyond what any individual company or even group of companies can do. This is basically a multi-country effort if you want to have a serious impact. And in the energy world, 1% is a tens, hundreds of billions of dollars of swing when it comes to that. So as an entrepreneur and from a technology perspective, there is very little capital out there to really pursue a lot of the things that are going to be needed. And yes, the technology, I agree with Chendal that the technology to start using it exists today, but I think we're just at the forefront. If you think about the cost of an electrolyzer, We went from a typical electrolyzer being $5,000 a kilowatt to now 2,000 to 1,000. We're right now in the above $600 to $800 range. That's going to keep sliding down. Once you get to the $100 to $200 range, then your low utilization electrolyzer paired with 20% solar, right? That makes sense. And now you've enabled the economics to match each other. You still have to get it to market. So even if you get to that $1 to $2 a kilogram somewhere in New Mexico, then you still got to transport it 1,000 miles. Right now, the cost of transporting that 1,000 miles will double, triple, quintuple the cost of that hydrogen. So all of a sudden, it's no longer economical. And the convenient thing about physics is that it's given us an easy translation. A kilogram of hydrogen is roughly the same as a diesel gallon equivalent.
Yeah.
So if you think about your inexpensive hydrogen, people talk about $2, $3. From an industrial perspective, that's particularly expensive when you think about the marginal cost of splitting natural gas or splitting methane and taking the hydrogen away from it. So that's going to be interesting to see how it shakes out. There's definitely an underinvestment in the early technology. There's a big gap because there is such a long amount of time to develop and deploy the technology that the economics are not there for the venture capital industry to really latch onto that. And if you're a corporate and you have to throw a lot of money and a lot of experiments, then if we had a model that were similar to Norway, where companies are highly incentivized to invest in R&D, maybe we'd stand a better chance at getting some of the technology enablers in the long run.
Victor, in terms of the educating the folks in Baytown and sort of understanding what hydrogen is going to be up to with projects like ExxonMobil's, is the economics of it part of the education process? Do you need to explain to citizenry, all right, this is sort of, this is what people are going to be paying for the end product? I mean, or is that sort of, folks for nerds like us in rooms like this?
I'm going to let my Exxon colleagues do the heavy lifting on that one, to be honest with you. But if I could just go back to the earlier point about incentivizing and what we in government can do. The reality is the only tool we have in our toolbox is our tax policy. So what we can do to incentivize, and that's why our deal gives ExxonMobil an 80% tax discount for 35 years to invest in this project. That's really as much as we can do. I'll let them speak to the relationships they have at the federal level, but that was a challenge in many respects to get some of our politicians to go with that. Because on the one hand, that is taking tax money away from city services, from city residents,
exactly.
precisely. Yeah. But we took the view that over the longer term, both the economic effect was a positive one, and importantly, the environmental one was worth that investment by us in terms of the tax discount. So, it is a challenge to us to keep politicians and residents plugged into that. And if I could also just make the point that the relationship is a very, very harmonious one, generally speaking, but it's not cozy. Yeah. We hold their feet to the fire when it comes to environmental issues in the city, and we'll continue to do that. So I just want to make it clear that we have a good working relationship, but it's not overly cozy.
It's not kumbaya.
No.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha. This is perfect timing for questions. I would love for y'all to chime in. Any questions for any of the panelists, or we can talk baseball.
I'd like a comment from the panel. The discussion is focused about the color of hydrogen. That's based on carbon intensity, which is basically the climate change metric. What about the air pollution metric affecting the people around Baytown? When you put that in a fuel cell or combustion engine, it really doesn't matter what the color of hydrogen is, unless you get really black. So I don't think that's distinction. We should not focus completely on climate change. That's going to be a longer term phenomenon. Air pollution is killing people today. I'd like to comment.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd say I agree that there's other emissions that you worry about when you, particularly transportation and other kinds of combustion, right? And hydrogen gives you a zero emissions in a lot of those respects. It doesn't always reduce the NOx to zero. Like, you still have to do things to keep that. So it's not 100% panacea, but those things can be mitigated the same as you do for diesel, and things like particulates are certainly going to be a lot less. So yeah, there's that also kind of side impact of the more the more you see a zero emissions fuel used in an area, the less smog and other things you're going to see. And for dense cities and what have you, could be very interesting.
And Shindle, I imagine that the conversation when you're talking about decarbonization generally, obviously you have those climate change sort of goals and you talk about net zero, but you I imagine have to talk about air pollution, have to talk about water pollution. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. In the carbon intensity, okay, so we talk about how much CO2 we are reducing from the production process itself, right? So that's what we're talking about. Then absolutely, we should also be talking about if we end up using hydrogen, what is the avoided emissions and CO2 and other emissions, air pollution in terms of NOx and other pollution reductions that we can achieve through hydrogen should also be absolutely part of the equation.
Pedro, are we limited by sort of the way that we think? Do we have to focus on things like carbon emissions and lose sight of things like air pollution?
No, air pollution is extremely important, if anything. I mean, I agree with the implications of the question, which is that reducing local emissions is extremely important in many situations. And one distinction that I want to add is that naturally, if you combust hydrogen in a combustion engine, you're going to generate more NOx than you do if you're combusting diesel or some other forms, simply because NOx is generated out of high temperature exposure. And that happens in an engine. So people don't like to talk about it, but using hydrogen in an engine seems like a waste in general. There are applications that could benefit from that, but generally speaking, this is where the fuel cells are the ones that solve that problem. So the fuel cells are, by nature, allow you to have a higher efficiency. And there are applications that can benefit from the functionality of a fuel cell in the sense that your output is electricity ultimately. So when we think about the alignment towards the end use case, and you can actually price in, the carbon is the one that you can least price right now. A lot of the other externalities are the ones that are easier to price. If you're developing a rail yard and you're using hydrogen, then you're eliminating a lot of the soot. I mean, those are the 60, 70-year-old locomotives that are tier 0, for example. So you haven't heard of tier 0 in a while, but in the locomotive world, a huge percentage of locomotives that are inside of the local city yards are tier 0. And that's because they already are 50 years old. You can probably get another 50 years out of the same unit.
Victor, it sounds like this question speaks directly to somebody like you too. I mean, obviously the globe doesn't care where carbon comes from, but if you're talking about local impact of air pollution.
Yeah, spot on. A question was an excellent one. That is what matters to people, the quality of the air, quality of the water. And again, that's why we do challenge our colleagues in the petrochemical industry in Baytown about those issues, and we'll continue to do that regardless of the economics of it. As I say, the environmental issues matter to us, and that is measured in those very basic quality of life standards for local people.
Gotcha. Another question? Yeah, go ahead.
Since we're sitting in a university, I was just wondering, it sounds like there's a lot of opportunity, there's a lot of unknowns for hydrogen to be a scalable energy source, and university partnerships, how do you see them as being? You're all different companies, different sizes. Do you see it being more policy support, more research support, student support, or is it all as far as how you partner with universities to further your goals? You all have these emissions goals that are very hefty. And I wonder just how much is proprietary, how much you want to share and partner with universities or higher ed.
I mean, y'all's is part of a partnership with the university.
Right, yeah, right. I mean, yeah, we have like, I don't know, was it 80 or 90 university partnerships, maybe more than that. But some very special ones like with UT, where we try to work closely. And I would say there's a big advantage to having kind of an objective view on the policy things. Having someone who's not considered to be, on the inside of some business deal to look at it and say, this is kind of what it really looks like. So that, that's very valuable for everyone. And we encourage that sort of engagement with universities. The second thing is the workforce. Right? We need the engineers. We need the researchers who can come and work on proprietary things and who can operate those facilities and construct and so forth. Right? This is the second thing. And then the third thing is, if we think further out, we do need to keep improving technology. We need to keep the learning curve moving. And that means, not just staying with the same solution over 20, 30 years, but you need to occasionally jump to something better. And so that's new catalysts or new, for hydrogen, the whole electrolyzer story that Pedro talked about, like there's a lot of R&D that's making that happen. And, I don't know, exactly what's going to get it to $200 a kilowatt, right? But that discovery probably hasn't been made yet. From what we can tell, it's still out there for someone to do. And so there's a lot of things universities can do, even at small scale and small research, that would add to the large scale picture, or add to this kind of end use devices that can make, once you have a lot of clean hydrogen available, people will find interesting things to do with it, beyond what we can imagine right now.
Well, even for, I imagine, the local workforce as well, if you're talking about, maybe an added tax base of folks coming who were educated at the University of Texas, come live in Baytown, work in Baytown, for somebody at the city level, this is great. These partnerships are great news, yeah?
They are indeed. And we have a very active relationship with our local further education college with the school district. And I see opportunities for extending that and working with universities, because part of this is also about upskilling our workforce so that they can get jobs locally and attract others from outside to come and live, not just work in Baytown, but come and live there.
Yeah. We have time for one more question if we have one, Neil.
So my question is a bit more downstream, right? So let's assume that the cost of producing hydrogen approaches the cost of producing natural gas, right? I mean, which is a strong assumption, but assuming that is the case. How do you see the metering transportation challenge? Because as we know, hydrogen is very light. I mean, there was a lot of work, I remember, from 15 years ago, hydrates and storing hydrogen in tanks and things like that. So I was wondering how much progress has been made. Like, for instance, transporting natural gas through pipelines is a well understood thing, but how would you transport hydrogen at volume, meter it safely, and distribute it?
Pedro, you're going to start? Yeah, go ahead.
So I think the advancements have been very minimal, to be frank with you. When you think about the improvements in the hydrogen storage, I mean, we've seen very marginal improvements in the cost in terms of dollars per kilogram stored. And when you think about the transportation of hydrogen, the challenge is that when you think about how much you're actually transporting. So in a cubic meter of liquid hydrogen, which is one of the most energy dense forms, or elemental energy dense forms, is only about 70 grams per liter. I mean, this is a tiny amount. If we compare that with natural gas, it's almost 500 grams per liter. So it's an enormous difference in density, even when adjusted for the gravimetric energy density. So the advancement is not there. I mean, when we think about transporting through hydrides or LOHCs and any other technologies, you're talking about single-digit percentage, and in some extreme cases, low teens in terms of percentage of hydrogen weight versus the percentage of whatever else that you're carrying. And that's a direct influencer on cost. So there's, when we think about hydrogen going from Western Australia to Japan, it can, at about 5 times of what it would be the cost of turning it into natural gas and transporting it as LNG into Japan. But that's an inconvenient discussion in terms of what's the best way to transport it. So we are just at the very early phases of understanding how to transport very large quantities at scale. And I know that there's ammonia discussions, methanol, but all of these have to have a long ways to go in order to scale to the levels that we need in some industries. And when you go over the ocean, that's one case. When you're having to traverse very large tracts of land, that's a whole different ballgame.
I will speak for myself. I'm about 10 times smarter about clean hydrogen now as a result of this panel. Thank you guys so much. I can't thank you enough. Let's give it up for these guys. So I think we have a 15-minute break.